Let's talk about P is for perichoresis. In our ABCs of modified theology, this is where we get to talk about the Trinity. So perichoresis is one of the most beautiful and elegant pictures of the Christian Godhead that many Christians don't know about. They're completely unaware of. The easiest way to break it down is that peri from perichoresis is the perimeter, and choresis is where we get choreography from. It's the dance of God, the life of God, a dance around the perimeter, the edges, always leaving room in the center. That choreography word is actually a Greek word that comes to us, and it means to give way or to make room. So think of ballroom dancing or square dancing, and you can imagine the dynamic movement that this word brings. Perichoresis, sometimes called mutual indwelling, is the dance of the Godhead, the picture of movement and interrelatedness. It's a constant exchange or moving around the edge, always providing space in the center. The theological concept affirms the divine essence is shared by each of the three persons of the Trinity in a manner that avoids blurring the distinctions among them. And thus, any characteristic of the one is shared and belongs to the three. This concept affirms the action of one person of the Trinity is fully the action of the other two persons of the Trinity. So in the Gospels, God points to Jesus and says, "This is my Son, whom I love, in him I am well pleased." So Jesus takes center stage. But then Jesus turns and says, "I do only that which I see the Father doing," bowing again. The Spirit anoints Jesus at his baptism and anoints him to point people to God. Jesus leaves and sends us, or is replaced by, the presence of the Spirit, taking his place in the dance. This paraclete then leads us into all truth and reminds us of what Jesus said, John 14:26. Admittedly, any talk about the Trinity gets complicated quickly. This is why there's so much contention surrounding the early church's councils and creeds. Modern arguments abound regarding the hierarchy of the Father, Son, and Spirit. In fact, in the 11th century, the Filioque clause caused a schism between the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Western Roman branch of the church. But contemporary conflicts multiply around gendered language of Trinitarian thought and moving towards formulations of God as creator, redeemer, comforter in non-gendered language. This, by the way, and I love to point this out, is a major distinction between strict monotheists like Jews and Muslims and Christianity, which is Trinitarian. It's not polytheistic, but it's not monotheistic. It's Trinitarian. It's a serious sticking point between Jews and Muslims to accept that Jesus was the Son of God and is worshipped as God. Islam teaches that God has no offspring, so Jesus is honored as a great prophet called Prophet Isa, peace be upon him, alongside other honored prophets. Look, whenever you talk about the Trinity, it takes upper-level philosophy and vocabulary to explain how three can be one, or how a monotheistic religion has three persons in the Godhead. So it's helpful to know that that word persons, God in three persons, is actually an old word of persona. It's like a Greek theatrical word from which we get like the role or the mask is a persona, the way we see God, what we see God doing. But it also brings up questions about what exactly happened on the cross when God died, when Christ died. Where exactly was God the Father at that moment? It's actually a really deep conversation. In books like Moltmann's The Crucified God say that what happened on the cross was an event between God and God's self, but from which we benefit. But outside of all of that speculation and historical developments, we have this legacy of this ancient concept called the perichoresis that is a picture of the inner life and the dance of God, and it was prominent in the 3rd century. But the question becomes, how do we take this theoretical and speculative, how do we take it out of that realm? What do we do with it? What are the implications and the applications if we're right that this is the nature and life of God? Those who want to be clear about these things and who think deeply about these things attempt to break it into God's eternal nature and God's interactions with the world. So some break it into the ontological Trinity, God and God's self, and the economic Trinity. That's a division that you'll see sometimes in systematic theologies. Others like to talk about the primordial nature of God and then the consequential nature of God, but they're both trying to address basically the same thing. No matter your conceptual schema, often the neglected question is, well, what do we do with this? What difference does it make? Or another way of asking it is, since this is what God is like, how should we be? Should we be like God in some way if this is true? Do our understandings of God impact the way that we live and interact and organize ourselves? If one has a hierarchical understanding of God, it might be difficult to employ a more shared or democratized view of religious community. There are many questions and even applications of Trinitarian understanding to our ecclesiology, the church, and to our politics, actually. So I want to tell you about what I think is a really direct implication. I personally have adopted a perichoretic view of the church and of liturgy. So I try to conceive of everything in a Trinitarian framework, including organizing our worship gatherings into 3 acts that have movement and interaction with them, taking turns, rotating who is central, and then stepping out to allow others to have a voice and to take center stage. I've actually taken out the platform and the stage from my sanctuaries so that there's no elevated space. I also took out the pews so that the furniture can be arranged in a perimeter configuration so that we meet in the round. And then I attempt to choreograph the entire gathering in such a way that one person or group is brought to the center before they move aside and make room for someone else's perspective or insights or experience to be then brought central and focused on. And then we put all of these in dialogue or interactive conversation together. There are similar considerations that could be fleshed out in areas of education, like I said, politics, economy, and relationships. But the question is, what is the nature of the divine, and what does that, if any, does it make a demand on us? Does it call us to anything? Are there any implications? Or is God so transcendent that there's no direct correlation to any arena of human affairs? So I'm really looking forward to talking about this concept of the perichoresis and its implications on us and the way we live and worship and organize together.